I've always thought I knew my family, the people I trusted most in the world. But 3 months after losing Mark, my husband of 42 years, I found myself staring at a message on my phone that made my hands shake. It came while I was in Florence, Italy, with my son Daniel and his wife Emma, on what I thought would be a comforting family trip. The message was short, almost impossible to believe I needed to leave quietly and not trust them. In that moment, I felt the weight of grief mix with something heavier doubt. I replayed their smiles, their careful words, the way Daniel had insisted this trip would be good for me, for all of us. It all seemed so thoughtful, so loving, but suddenly, everything felt staged. I remember walking through the marble lobby of the hotel, my heart thudding, realizing that what I had assumed was care might actually be something else entirely. I wondered how I could have been so blind, yet I also felt a spark of determination. Something inside me said that I needed to trust my instincts, even if it meant standing up alone in a foreign country. This story, I realized, wouldn't just be about grief or loss. It would be about betrayal, survival, and reclaiming the life that had been quietly threatened right under my nose. Have you ever felt that moment when someone you love suddenly becomes a stranger? That was me at 9:30 a.m. in Florence, holding a phone that had changed everything. And it all started with that simple warning. I had spent the past 3 months learning how to live with mornings that used to belong to two. Making coffee alone felt hollow. The silence in my kitchen, a constant reminder of the emptiness Mark had left behind. For 42 years, our lives had been entwined in routines so familiar, I barely noticed them. And now, every small task felt like walking through a museum of memories. When Daniel first suggested that I join him and Emma on a trip to Italy, I hesitated. I remembered how hesitant I'd always been about leaving home, about stepping into unfamiliar places alone. But he insisted, speaking about change and healing as though distance and beauty could stitch up the raw edges of grief. Emma, with her polite smiles and measured concern, added her voice to the encouragement. They painted a picture of family bonding, of laughter under the Tuscan sun, of quiet dinners in Florence. I should have noticed the subtle cues that didn't add up the eagerness in Daniel's smile. The way Emma seemed to know exactly what I'd want before I said a word. But grief makes you vulnerable to kindness, even when it feels slightly too rehearsed. I allowed myself to imagine a trip filled with warmth and gentle support, and I wanted to believe that this was their way of helping me heal. Arriving in Florence, I remembered every detail of the hotel lobby, the marble floors, the warm chandeliers, the way sunlight spilled through tall windows. Daniel's charm was practiced, Emma's attention precise, and I felt the tiniest pang of unease. My request for a room with a view of the city had been brushed aside in favor of something peaceful and quiet. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself that perhaps they knew me better than I knew myself, that maybe rest was exactly what I needed. Still, a small voice whispered that things were not as simple as they appeared. I walked through the quiet hallways to my room, noticing how the silence felt heavy, almost deliberate. The air smelled faintly of lavender, the kind of scent hotels use to make guests feel comforted. But to me, it felt like a warning I didn't yet understand. I found myself thinking about Mark, about the life we had built together, and I realized that the weight of grief was not the only thing I carried. There was also the beginning of a doubt that I would need to pay attention to, a sense that perhaps the people I trusted most had intentions that I couldn't yet see. I wondered how easy it is to be blinded by love, by routine, and by habit. That morning, as I unpacked the little I brought, I resolved to trust both my heart and my instincts, even if they were in conflict. Walking toward the window, I allowed myself to imagine the city beyond the walls, the streets alive with people, the hum of life going on while my own felt paused. And yet, in that quiet, I felt the first flicker of awareness that this trip might be more than just an escape from grief. It might be the moment where everything I thought I knew would be tested. Have you ever felt that tension between hope and doubt? That fragile space where trust and suspicion collide? I hadn't. Not until that morning, standing in a hotel room in Florence, realizing that healing and betrayal might walk hand in hand. As the first day in Florence unfolded, I began noticing the little things, the details that didn't sit right. Daniel seemed unusually eager to handle every arrangement, from the hotel paperwork to the dinner reservations, as though he wanted me to follow along without questioning anything. Emma nodded in agreement, her smiles precise, almost rehearsed, and every movement felt deliberate. My heart tightened with unease, though I tried to dismiss it as travel stress. At dinner, I realized the family suite wasn't what I had imagined. My window faced a quiet courtyard, far from the Tuscan hills I had pictured, and the room itself seemed tucked away, as if designed to isolate me. I found myself questioning their insistence on peace and quiet, wondering if perhaps their intentions weren't entirely innocent. Every explanation I remembered from Daniel and Emma now carried a subtle edge, like they were guiding me toward a path I wasn't aware I was on. Later that night, I lay in bed listening to faint murmurs from the adjoining room. Something in their hushed tones sounded deliberate, not casual. It reminded me of the small tricks Daniel used when I raised him subtle manipulations disguised as concern. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to make sense of fragmented sentences about documents and appointments I had never heard of. The realization began to creep in that this trip wasn't just about family bonding or helping me heal. When my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, my pulse quickened. The words were chilling, but clear. I needed to leave quietly and not trust them. My hands trembled as I read it again. Someone I trusted from Mark's past was warning me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could a simple family trip become something so calculated? I remembered Mark's meticulous ways, the way he always checked every detail before making a decision. And I understood how vulnerable I had been. Grief had softened my edges, made me more willing to accept kindness at face value. And yet, the warning was undeniable. I began piecing together all the inconsistencies, the rushed smiles, the over-prepared explanations, the insistence that I sign papers without fully understanding them. It was a strange mixture of fear and clarity. Fear for what might happen if I trusted too easily, and clarity that I couldn't rely solely on love or family bonds to protect me. That night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I realized that I would need to observe, to think, and to act carefully. Florence was beautiful. Yes, but it had become the backdrop for a test I never expected to face. Have you ever felt the sudden shift from comfort to suspicion, when everything familiar suddenly feels like a trap I had? Right there, in that softly lit room, understanding for the first time that sometimes the people we trust most can hide intentions we never imagine. And as I lay there, heart racing, I knew that the next day would demand vigilance, strategy, and courage I hadn't called upon in years. By the time I drifted into a restless sleep, I promised myself that I would pay attention, that I would trust the quiet instincts I'd learned over a lifetime. The next steps wouldn't be easy, but I realized that survival sometimes requires seeing what others hope you will not. And in that delicate tension, the journey of discovery and confrontation was just beginning. The next morning, I moved quietly, aware that I needed to trust neither Daniel nor Emma until I understood their intentions. Every step through the hotel felt like walking a tightrope. I examined my room carefully, noticing small changes I hadn't seen before, the way my suitcase zipper was slightly out of place. My toiletries arranged differently, and even my purse shifted just enough to make me pause. Someone had gone through my belongings, and it wasn't for comfort. I replayed all the conversations and gestures from the previous day, the subtle manipulations hidden behind concern. They had painted a story in which I seemed confused, vulnerable, and unaware. But the reality I knew was very different. Grief had left me tender. Yes, but it had not left me blind. I had managed a household for decades, balanced budgets, organized events, and navigated unexpected crises. Now, I had to channel that experience into survival. As I considered the warning messages, I realized that this was not just about papers or hotel rooms. They intended to use my supposed confusion to gain control of my assets. The realization hit me like ice water. Every smile, every gentle word of concern was part of a carefully constructed trap. And yet, I couldn't react impulsively. I needed a plan. I decided to observe quietly, to map their routines, and to anticipate their next moves. I imagined myself as a strategist, not a victim. The hotel gardens became my practice ground, walking the perimeter, testing patterns, noting the ways staff moved and the flow of guests. I reminded myself that years of running a household, planning surprises, and managing schedules had honed skills I never thought I would need in this way. By mid-morning, I had a clear understanding of what might happen next. They would attempt to present me with documents, claiming it was routine, claiming it was for my own good. I would be expected to sign without hesitation, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I started rehearsing responses in my mind, imagining the calm, deliberate tone I would need to maintain to avoid alarming them too soon while keeping control of the situation. I also reflected on Mark, on the life we had built together. He had always been meticulous, cautious, and protective, qualities I had admired and relied on. I realized that those lessons weren't gone. They had simply been buried under grief. Now, I had to draw on them fully to ensure that the life and resources I had preserved wouldn't be taken from me. I asked myself quietly if I had ever imagined needing this level of vigilance with my own child. The answer was no. But the truth was, undeniable survival sometimes requires seeing beyond the faces we trust and acting decisively when necessary. By noon, I felt a strange mixture of fear and empowerment. Fear for what might happen if I misstepped, and empowerment from knowing that I was not helpless. I was alert, aware, and ready. As the afternoon approached, I knew the confrontation was inevitable, but I also knew that being prepared, thinking strategically, and trusting my instincts would be my greatest allies. Florence, with all its beauty and history, had become more than a vacation. It was the stage where I would reclaim my agency. And in that awareness, a calm resolve settled over me, carrying me forward into the next chapter of this unexpected and painful journey. By the time Daniel and Emma led me to the consulate, my chest felt heavy with a mix of dread and determination. I thought back to every subtle manipulation, every smile that had seemed caring but now felt rehearsed, and I realized that I was about to face the culmination of their plan. My mind raced through the documents they intended for me to sign, the court-appointed evaluations, and the intricate steps they had taken to portray me as incapable. Sitting there, I reminded myself that fear was not my ally. The years of managing a household, of balancing decisions large and small, had prepared me for this moment in ways I hadn't yet appreciated. I had to trust my experience, my instincts, and the support of the people who had reached out to warn me. Every breath I took was measured, deliberate, grounding me in the reality that I was not powerless. As the proceedings began, I watched Daniel and Emma present themselves as concerned family, their words polished and precise, and yet, the inconsistencies I had noticed over the past few days now made sense. The timing, the over-prepared explanations, the insistence on certain actions. Each piece of evidence I had gathered, every observation I had made, became a silent weapon, reinforcing my awareness and strengthening my resolve. I reflected on Mark and the life we had built together. I realized that protecting myself wasn't just about finances or documents, it was about preserving the dignity, integrity, and independence that we had shared. The betrayal was deep, but I refused to let it define me. I needed to confront it calmly, strategically, and with clarity. Watching the court proceedings unfold, I felt a mixture of anger and quiet satisfaction as the truth emerged. The inconsistencies in their story, the deliberate manipulations, and the carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. I could see the subtle signs of tension on Daniel's face, the fleeting uncertainty in Emma's eyes, and I felt a surge of validation. My instincts had been right all along. At the same time, I held on to a sense of compassion for myself, for the grief that had made me vulnerable, and even, in a small way, for the family I once knew. I knew that understanding their actions did not excuse them, but it allowed me to maintain my composure and present my case with confidence. Each revelation, each detail I had quietly gathered, became part of a tapestry that demonstrated not confusion or incapacity, but resilience and awareness. The judge's attention, focused and discerning, made me realize that the narrative of concern and vulnerability would no longer hold sway. I felt a quiet empowerment as the evidence of their planning, the private investigator reports, the prearranged documents, the subtle manipulations was laid bare. The weight of betrayal lifted slightly, replaced by a growing certainty that justice, at least in this moment, was on my side. When the decision came, denying their petitions and protecting my autonomy, a profound relief washed over me. But even in that relief, I understood that the journey was not just about legal victory. It was about reclaiming trust in myself, about recognizing that my experience, my awareness, and my courage could withstand even the most intimate betrayal. Sitting there in the consulate, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to acknowledge the depth of what I had faced, and to feel gratitude for the clarity and strength that had carried me through. Florence, with all its beauty and history, had witnessed a personal reckoning, and as I prepared to step out, I realized that I was no longer merely surviving grief. I was actively reclaiming my life and my power. Have you ever faced a moment where every decision, every observation, and every instinct mattered more than ever? That was me, right there, navigating a web of betrayal and trust. Discovering that courage often comes quietly, from knowing your own worth. And in that realization, I found not just victory, but a renewed sense of purpose that would guide the days ahead. After the court proceedings, I finally felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The fear, the doubt, the constant questioning of every smile and word from Daniel and Emma, it began to fade. I realized that I had reclaimed not just my assets, but my sense of self, my autonomy, and the confidence to trust my instincts again. Florence no longer felt like a stage for manipulation. It had become a place of clarity, a reminder that even in the midst of grief, I could stand firm. I spent the following days quietly reflecting on what had happened, walking along the cobblestone streets, feeling the sun on my face, and allowing myself to savor the simple pleasures I had long taken for granted. Each small moment, a cup of coffee at a street-side cafe, the distant sound of music drifting from a piazza, the laughter of strangers sharing life reminded me that life continued, and that I still had a right to experience it fully. I thought about Mark, about the life we had shared, and I realized that protecting my legacy was about more than money or property. It was about honoring the trust and care we had built together, about ensuring that the lessons I had learned, the strength I had cultivated, would continue to guide me. The independence I regained was not just legal, it was emotional and spiritual, a triumph of resilience over betrayal. Looking forward, I found a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I chose a new apartment in Tuscany, a place where I could create my own routines, savor new experiences, and even help others who had faced similar betrayals. The sense of empowerment was profound, a quiet but firm knowledge that I could rebuild, redefine, and thrive. Have you ever faced a moment when you realized that standing up for yourself was the most important act of love you could give to yourself, to your memories, and to those who truly mattered? That was me, on the terrace of my new home, feeling the sun warm my face, knowing that while some doors had closed, countless others were opening. And in that moment, I finally understood that life after loss can be not only beautiful, but fully my own. If you've ever faced betrayal or felt unsure of who to trust, I hope my story reminds you that clarity, courage, and patience can help you reclaim your life. Share your experiences, comment below, and remember, you always have the strength to stand for yourself. Sitting on my terrace in Tuscany, I reflected on how grief, betrayal, and resilience had shaped these past weeks. I realized that even in the darkest moments, clarity and courage could guide me toward freedom and joy. Life continues, and our strength often emerges when we least expect it. Share your own story, and remember to honor your instincts and your heart.